Well, following the latest developments around the DA, Corporate South Africa Chairperson Tebogo Kast has written a piece to voice his opinion on the matter. He looks at opposition politics, which is undergoing radical revision as racially and culturally diverse leaders of the DA appear to be engaging in open hostilities. Kast and political analyst Jamie Mighty join us in studio to unpack this issue further. Good evening, gentlemen. Thanks very much for your time. Just first, what you make of the drama first at the weekend, the Helen Zille being elected, Federal Council Chairperson, and then a day later, Herman Mashaba resigns.
I think with regards to Herman Mashaba's resignation, I think that was anticipated somehow if you had heard his utterances before the council elections happened. And that he did it today may have taken many people by surprise itself, because maybe one would have thought that he would have waited a bit to let this sink in and then make a move. But then I think he rather moved faster than most people would have thought he would.
What do you think lies behind that?
I think, as one could extrapolate from his statement, where he says he never wanted to wait to be pushed out. He wants to leave at his own terms. So if you take it from that, you would see that he decided that he wanted to decide the time and the timing and the place of his departure.
Jerry Mighty, your thoughts?
So I think it's clear that the DA has been suffering from a lack of relevance. They've been struggling with the youth constituency, and that's part of the reason why they were unable to increase their support base. I think a lot of the typical analysis is just say they lost votes to Freedom Front Plus, they lost votes to the ANC because of the Cyril Ramaphosa effect. But a lot of people haven't investigated why young people are not drawn to the message of the DA. Africa is a largely young continent, and South Africa is a largely young country. And the youth of South Africa are not drawn to the Democratic Alliance.
I want to focus, just for the purposes of this conversation at this point, at least, on what happened, the events leading up to the weekend, and today, Herman Mashaba deciding to call it quits. Just your reading.
So I mean, this is the backdrop to that. Is that in the desperation that was created as an aftermath of the elections, the DA then did this back-to-basics approach, where Tony Leon comes back, where Kotse comes back, where you have Michel Leroux saying that, they need to go back to a basic formulation, and Helen Zille re-emerges through the Institute of Race Relations. I think what we now see is a house divided. And as the famous adage goes, a house divided cannot stand. What Herman Mashaba did today was to expose the rifts that have been behind the scenes, that have been denied by many people in the DA, because they have been playing good politics, where you put a positive front, you speak positively, whilst trying to conceal this pity that everyone has seen. So a lot of things were revealing around his discussion around he didn't have popular support from the Democratic Alliance for his coalition agreements with the EFF. How he was saying that people wanted him to act arrogantly, to act as if they had a majority, when in fact they had none. Where when he was insourcing, they were telling him that this is not the policy of the Democratic Alliance, and he said, well, make it your policy. What he was doing was revealing to us that the Democratic Alliance has been struggling to deal with the shift of youth politics and broadly global politics.
But is it just youth, though? Is it just youth, or are there? Because if you look at Herman Mashaba and his age, for example, you look at some of the people who sympathize with him, who say, he had his heart at the right place, whatever other people may think of him. Those are people who are way beyond the youth.
No, I'm looking at
age. What I'm saying is it not? Is he not representing, a much wider group within the DA?
No, of course. Herman is speaking to the issues as they stand now. I'm offering a broader analysis as to why the party has been struggling, and why perhaps even this strategy of back to basics is not necessarily going to work, because the global dynamics of politics have shifted, be it the Democratic Party in America, be it conservative movements, etc. You're seeing that there's a different energy and a frustration, not just with politics as usual, but with the capitalist order as it exists right now. So the discussions that the Democratic Alliance needs to be having are not necessarily these ones. But when we come back to Herman specifically, he does show a rift in the way the DA understands coalition politics. You'll see what Helen Zille was saying is that the tail must not wag the dog, because she views coalition politics as being, you must be assertive, you must not let the other side get something. Whereas Herman Mashaba was operating from a win-win perspective with the EFF, where he gave them insourcing, where he did extend the clinic hours to make sure more people had access, and there was a win-win relationship there, but the Democratic Alliance didn't support that. But when you go deeper into the problematization that Herman Mashaba pointed out, he pointed out that there's been a concerted effort by a particular faction within the Democratic Alliance to reclaim power. And that faction is the people who are the think tank which is associated with the Institute of Race Relations. And when you do a deep dive into DA politics, you'll find that they're interesting social media characters, YouTube characters, Reynaldo House, for example, the people who run this Renegade Report account, and it's also like a podcast. And then you have several other Institute of Race Relations accounts, you know, Sihle Ngobese, who is Big Daddy Liberty, Gwen Gwenya, and then you've also got some journalists who come from the Institute of Race Relations who now write for mainstream publications. All of this was the right-wing cabal that Herman Mashaba was pointing out. And this cabal is the cabal that was resisting Mmusi Maimane's attempts to reform the representation in the party. I don't know if you recall last year.
I wanted to stop right there, because that's what I want to explore. But I want to come to you, because for you, if I've read your piece correctly, it's the ideological foundation on which the Democratic Alliance is built that is creating all the havoc, because it is not solid or suited to the current world order, so to speak.
Look, the whole idea of the DA being champions of liberalism itself, it's a fallacy. Because liberalism means you are open to accepting things that may not necessarily be, you may not necessarily agree with, but you'd consider them and be...
Or even believe in.
Or believe in. You'd be able to do that. And what I found also very interesting is the fact that the DA wants to select which parts of the constitution of the country it wants to adhere to. Certainly if you look at section 217, subsection 3 and 2 itself, where it talks about finance and procurement, it talks about the need to establish mechanism to bring in all those who have been excluded from the past, read black people, into the fore. So that is something that is constitutionally entrenched. So for a party that wants everybody to believe that they are constitutionally entrenched entity, to now want to deny the need for transformation, read black economic empowerment, I think it's rather hypocritical. And I think this is exposed by what measures that Herman Mashaba tried to do. Even if you look at the utterances of Mmusi himself, he's been saying this is the DA that ought to be accepting of the national agenda, nationhood. If we are to strive to achieve nationhood and racial integration, we need to embrace tools such as BEE, which I think is at the core of where the differences are. I mean, you recall Gwen Ngwenya's utterances about BEE, where she basically just rejected it completely. But if you look at Herman Mashaba's ways of doing business, was more embracing of BEE, although not so much.
Do you think Mmusi Maimane managed to sort of be clear to everybody, especially those within his party, about what it is exactly that he is about and where he wants to take the party, and perhaps more importantly, how?
No, I don't think that Mmusi was very successful in defining his African liberalism. Even last year when they were at Congress and he was speaking on these issues, he wasn't very clear what is it How is it distinct from classical liberalism, and how is it contemporary to the demands of the modern South African political landscape? This is why I've been saying that the challenge of the DA has been, in this electoral cycle, that of relevance, because people don't really understand why it takes the positions it takes, and in instances they generally don't agree with the positions that the DA takes. For instance, when they were saying to us, listen, diversity can be defined at an individual level. You know, if you have 10 white men, those 10 white men are different because each of them grew up in different homes. Now, that may be appealing to me if I was a white man to know that I'm recognized, but it's not really reflective of the historical challenges that are faced by different demographic groups. Because if you did not grow up in a township, the urgency of a burst pipe, the urgency of lights that are off is not the same if you have generators, etc., etc. So when they rejected Musi's calls for there to be more diversity in parliament, for example, that showed that the Democratic Alliance as a think tank doesn't understand the local conversations, because there's no way that if I'm not from Alexander, I can speak to the issues that affect Alexandra. You need to make sure that there is a member of parliament who is from that background, who understands those issues, who understands that urgency. But that is the ideological problem that the DA doesn't appreciate.
I mean, what the white people in the DA that Jamie is talking about are the same people that the so-called Black Caucus, although they deny that there's such a thing. I mean, if you listen to Zwagele Mngwangu, who I spoke to earlier, Ngaba Panga, who I spoke to earlier, both supported Athol Trollip. Athol Trollip was their candidate. There wasn't a single black person who was a candidate there.
It says a lot. Either it confirms what Steve Biko once said when he said white liberals believe that white leadership or stewardship of politics is a sine qua non, you know. In other words, it's a given that white need to be the alpha males, to use the term, in terms of leadership. They may want to suggest or to give an impression that they are in the background, but in actual fact, they will be calling this, pulling the slims from the back. If you look at Musi's ascendance itself, it was because probably, and it is widely believed that Helen Zille must have thought he'll be able to control Musi. But as time went, Musi started finding his own feet, and he veered off what may have been the agenda. And once he started being assertive and expressing his thoughts and stands publicly, I think that put him at odds with the old guard.
We've run out of time. Very quickly from each one of you, what does a Musi Maimane do now? Because he needs to grow the party, notwithstanding the challenges that he faces, and of course a Helen Zille, who is now the Federal Council chairperson.
Well, to be honest, I think that Musi needs to find a dignified exit. He doesn't have an organic constituency in the DA.
He has made it clear he wants to fight on.
Well, I mean, he says that, but he really needs to think sensibly here, because this is going to be like a crash and burn situation, because the party has positioned itself against his leadership, against his vision and direction. This is not new. It's from last year. All of the measures that he was trying to pass were rejected, and rejected very aggressively, from diversity, representation, to definitions of what the party should take. So he's not doing well. He needs to find a dignified exit. He needs to sign his Harvard applications and make a plan for himself.
What does a Zwagele Mngwangu do? What does a Ngaba Panga do, assuming that Musi Maimane does what he says he should do?
They have to make choices, and the choices are clear. Either they stay and subject themselves to the supremacy of the Helen Zilles of this world and just toe the line, or they stand up and do something drastic, which would mean that they would also have to leave. But even if they leave, the question is, what do they go out and do? Do they go out and join Patricia de Lille's good, or go and form an own party, join hands with Herman Mashaba or Musi and form something? I'm not sure if that will also mean, because you also need funding, and we know that politics, funds drive politics, and I think the DA has proven that they control liberal funding that is made available for politics in this country.
Gentlemen, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks so much for having us.
Tebogo Gas and political analyst Jamie Mighty.